Bonjour et bienvenue à Rendez-Vous avec Yasmin
and Kumar. Our last episode was on the restoration and the premiere of the film Gehenu Lamai, directed by Sumitra Piris.
Nous avons choisi le film de Sumitra Piris pour plusieurs raisons. La première, c'est qu'il faisait partie d'une liste de films qui nous a été donnée par une universitaire française, Madame Villasny Tampo-Autin, ainsi que par la National Film Corporation, qui nous ont alertés tous les deux sur la condition physique d'un certain nombre de films sri-lankais qui étaient à la fois importants pour le patrimoine et puis qui étaient dans des conditions physiques de dégradation assez avancées et qu'il fallait restaurer. Grâce à un argumentaire développé par Madame Villasny Tampo-Autin, on a pu obtenir un financement pour la restauration d'un film. Et nous avons choisi le film de Sumitra Piris parce que déjà elle avait une importance particulière dans les relations entre la France et le Sri Lanka. Elle a été ambassadrice de Sri Lanka en France dans les années 90. Et puis c'était aussi une figure importante de la scène culturelle sri-lankaise. Par ailleurs, le fait de restaurer le film d'une femme réalisatrice, cela rentrait en écho avec les priorités de cette ambassade et les priorités de la France à l'étranger, c'est-à-dire la diplomatie féministe et la valorisation du travail des femmes et du patrimoine qu'elles ont construit. Enfin, le film de Sumitra Piris, c'est pas seulement le film d'une réalisatrice, c'est aussi le film sur des jeunes filles et sur des destins de jeunes filles à Sri Lanka. Et ce destin, il résonne aussi de manière universelle. Ce n'est pas seulement une histoire typiquement sri-lankaise, c'est aussi une histoire des jeunes filles au moment de l'adolescence qui sont prises dans des contraintes familiales, morales, sociales. Et c'est ces destins qu'on a choisi tout particulièrement de restaurer, tout en sachant qu'on contribue à la restauration d'une œuvre importante du patrimoine sri-lankais, d'une réalisatrice encore plus importante.
And so today's episode focuses on a comprehensive analysis and review of the film by Uditha Devapriya, a writer, reviewer of art and culture and foreign policy.
Sumitra Piris, a film icon and a national icon. For over 40 years, Sumitra Piris directed a series of films which put both her and her country in the spotlight of world cinema, starting with her debut Gehenu Lamai in 1978. Unlike a majority of South Asian women directors, Sumitra Piris found herself in the director's chair after securing an education in the West and graduating to the ranks of assistant director and editor in Sri Lanka. She found herself in the company of some of the leading filmmakers of her day in Sri Lanka, as well as the leading producers. Over the years, Sumitra Piris has been the subject of numerous newspaper articles, interviews, and biographies. Perhaps the most comprehensive of these biographies, in English, would have to be Villasny Tampo-Autin's Sumitra Piris, Sri Lankan filmmaker, a book that engages critically and comprehensively with her life, her work, her social background, where she came from, and her contribution to cinema, both Sri Lankan and South Asian. A leading film scholar, and specifically a scholar of Sri Lankan and Sinhala cinema, Professor Autin played a pivotal role in the restoration of Gehenu Lamai. When talking about Gehenu Lamai, I think one thing we need to keep in mind is that it delved into an experience that was highly unique for its time and also for our time. What we are talking about is a film about a South Asian woman, based and set firmly in a South Asian rural setting, directed by a South Asian woman director, who herself came from that very background which the film delves into. In that sense, I think it marked a milestone of sorts for Sri Lankan cinema, the sort which, in my opinion, has yet to be appreciated in full by both audiences and critics. What made Gehenu Lamai so unique and special was basically that until that point, Sri Lankan films about women tended to depict them as heroines or villainesses, It was a basically black and white portrayal of Sri Lankan women that we saw in most Sri Lankan films at the time. But Gehenu Lamai refuses to engage in those binaries. It actually portrays a very different scenario for Sri Lankan women from that period. And in that, I suppose, you can find how unique it was for its time. You have to also look at how Sri Lanka was at the time. Gehenu Lamai in Sri Lanka was released in 1978. When Sumitra Piris was directing the film, was making the film, Sri Lanka was under a totally different political dispensation, a totally different government. But when the film was released, it was a totally different economic and social order that had begun to creep into the country. And inasmuch as the film depicts a certain way of life and a certain sort of milieu in the Sri Lanka of the time, I think we have to also look at Gehenu Lamai and contextualize it in that particular period in Sri Lankan history, where the country was evolving from one particular social order into another. That in itself gets reflected very well in Gehenu Lamai. So, one of the larger themes that Gehenu Lamai explores is obviously the plight and fate of a woman in that particular situation in life. Gehenu Lamai essentially ends up with two sisters facing the same fate. Through the story of these two sisters, Sumitra Piris manages to shatter one of the biggest stereotypical motives that were there in the Sinhala cinema at the time, which was this broad classification of women into heroines and villainesses. Kusum is the obedient Sinhala daughter. Her sister is the rebellious girl aspiring to be an actress. But both end up in the same situation. Despite one being obedient and the other defiant, both of them confront the same challenges in life and end up in the same hall. The two songs featured in Gehenu Lamai, Neela Vikramasinghe's Vyogi and Victor Ratnayaka's Gehenu Lamai, in a way also reflect this dualism, these larger themes in the story. Vyogi is essentially about the sadness, the unhappiness that comes with unrequited love. Gehenu Lamai is a cautionary song when you read between the lines about the dangers that women face once they leave their comfort zones. In a way, when you look at these two songs in unison, when you listen to them in unison, you realize that even with the music, Sumitra Piris was trying to shatter these stereotypes that had been so typical of the Sri Lankan cinema until then. Gehenu Lamai has a highly unique feminine perspective, which was, in a way, quite revolutionary for its time. Shacini, what are your comments on that?
I think I would like to take a moment to speak on the plight of femininity that is depicted in the movie. We see Vasanti, a talented young girl who was on the way to university, who had to unfortunately forego her dreams to take the role of a caretaker in her family. So that is as a feminine role. Being a caretaker, she was not able to pursue her dreams because her duty, she felt, was to be with her family. And I think that still resonates even though it's 45 years later with young women today in our country, because there are many, many women I know that even I grew up with who have had to make certain sacrifices because of their sense of duty to their families by being a woman.
Another perspective that comes out in Gehenu Lamai is the youth perspective. And I think as a film that was made more than 40, 50 years ago, that perspective is quite important. Bonjour, Hirun. So, this film was released 26 years before you were born, and you saw the restored version a couple of months ago. How do you think it resonated with you, and how do you think it resonated with your generation?
Yes, that's true. It's a movie from a completely different time period. But honestly, it didn't feel distant at all. You know, even though the setting is rural, the pace is slow, I felt like the emotions expressed in the movie were quite raw and relatable to us. But more than anything, I think Sumitra Piris's direction helped us to see the movie, to see the story through Kusum's eyes. The way she faces social barriers, her sense of being trapped in something beyond her circumstances. But Udita, I think your question connects with something bigger. How can we draw young audiences to Sri Lankan classics?
Absolutely, Hirun. So, what have you got to say about that?
If young people can access the restored versions of these movies with proper sound, subtitles, eventually they'll start to feel these films. At the same time, if we can reintroduce these movies through discussions, documentaries, screenings, maybe interviews, you know, young people will stop seeing them as old and will start seeing them as timeless.
Stories told by women and for women are few and far between.
And Gehenu Lamai is one of them.
Gehenu Lamai was restored by India's Film Heritage Foundation in association with the Lester James Piris and Sumitra Piris Foundation under the aegis of FISH, France, India, Sri Lanka, Cine Heritage, saving films across borders. This is a pioneering international collaboration between the Film Heritage Foundation, the Embassy of France and the French Institute in India, and the Embassy of France in Sri Lanka and the Maldives. This restoration deserves the highest praise possible. It will allow audiences across the world to witness and truly appreciate the masterpiece as it was really meant to be seen.
Merci de nous avoir suivis.
À la prochaine.
The 47th edition of the Festival of Three Continents was held in Nantes and Loire-Atlantique from November 21st to 29th, 2025. The festival explored Sri Lankan cinema through an exceptional program of rare works, some of which have been restored from one of South Asia's least known film industries. This retrospective stems from a collaboration launched in April with the National Film Corporation and the Sri Lankan National Archives as part of the France-India-Sri Lanka Cine Heritage Project, coinciding with the restoration of Sumitra Piris's masterpiece, The Girls, by the Film Heritage Foundation. Retrospective supported by the French Embassy in Sri Lanka.